The tragic death of JonBenet Ramsey has remained a haunting mystery for decades. In this analysis, we seek to bridge the forensic details of her autopsy with a psychologically driven reconstruction of JonBenet Ramsey's final moments, grounded in evidence but told in language accessible to the everyday person. This analysis reflects both the physical trauma documented in the autopsy and the behavioral motivations that may have driven those events. This isn't about singular claims. It's about examining plausible, emotionally, and forensically coherent sequences to understand what kind of moment, rage, or loss of control could result in such a cascade of injuries. This is the behavioral and forensic analysis of JonBenet Ramsey's injuries, a narrative reconstruction. Stick tight. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kato, and thanks for watching. We are going to, in this episode, be talking a little bit about or walking through the first part of the autopsy report. Now, um, I've tried to think about this long and hard, and I probably studied this autopsy report. I looked at it and tried to dissect some things uh, maybe several months ago, and I've just been apprehensive to talk about it, not because I'm scared to talk about it, but I've just been apprehensive. There's been other areas that I wanted to look at more and give um, more more time to, um, and I wanted to give myself a little bit more time to understand this. Before we get started, I want to say thank you to a special person. I want to send a huge shout out to Main Hypnosis LLC. Main is a member of the channel and an avid supporter of the channel. And we love avid supporters of the channel. And thank you, everyone who liked the comment or liked the gift. I appreciate your support as well. And everybody in the comments, as I always say, wherever you're from, shout it out. I love kind of, seeing different places that people are tuning in from. And it's really encouraging. So thank you, Maine, for the donation. Really appreciate you and appreciate you for a long time. Absolutely. So thank you so much. Got to give you the hug. And I hope you enjoy this next episode. So as I said before, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this page of the autopsy report and trying to get as far as we can and understand a little bit more as as we go on. So this is from uh, you know the office of Boulder County of the Boulder County coroner. Um, I'm not going to read the address, but the autopsy report of JonBenet Ramsey, birth date on 8/6 of 1990, age 6 years old, female. Dr. Meyer, uh, uh, coroner is the type. Autopsy 96A, 96A 155. Death, marked official death looks like it's marked on 12/26, 1996 at 13:23. Death is marked as 13:23, which is, I think, 123 is when he marked it. Yeah, about 123 p.m. is when he marked it. And autopsy date, official autopsy date was 8:15 in the morning, 12/27 of 96. And so the final diagnosis, ligature, I'll say there was a ligature is like a furrowing in the neck, or not a furrowing, it's like a um trying to be YouTube friendly here, that's why I'm um but anyways, it's sort of like a ligature around the neck area. Okay. And so under that, you have a circumferential ligature with associated ligature furrow of the neck, abrasions, and petechial hemorrhaging, neck petechial on the neck, petechial hemorrhaging or hemorrhages, conjunctival surfaces of the eyes and the skin, Craniocerebral injuries, and under that you have scalp contusions, linear comminuted fracture of the right side of the skull, linear pattern of contusions of right cerebral hemisphere, subarachnoid and subdural hemorrhage. You have small contusion tips on the tips of the temporal lobes. In part 3, you have abrasions of the right cheek. You also have contusion on the posterior right shoulder. It's the back of the right shoulder. Number 5, you have abrasions of the left lower back and posterior left lower leg. So that's the back, on the left part of the lower back, probably closer to the waist area, I would think. And then the posterior left leg, lower left leg on the back of the left leg. And then you have part 6, abrasions and vascular congestion of the private area mucosa. And when I say private area, you know what I'm talking about. And so in part 7, you have the ligature of the right wrist, toxicology, no drugs detected. And so the cause of death of this 6-year-old was that choking hazard in the around the neck area associated with that craniocerebral trauma, signed Dr. E. Meyer, the pathologist. And so I wanted to look specifically at this page, and I know there are other things on pages 2 and whatever that kind of bring clarity to some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. But I just wanted to talk about, what we have here, just to kind of give us a hint of what might be important. Why would Dr. Meyer put some of these things on, the fact that Dr. Meyer put some of these things on the front part, like the abrasion of the right cheek and the abrasion or the contusion on the arm or and stuff like that. There's a quote I want to look at that I found it interesting, and I was like, huh. And so in the I just thought the word abrasion, the use of the word abrasion was funny or interesting. It didn't mean anything to me now, but I just thought the use of the word abrasion. I don't use abrasion in my everyday language at all. For me, abrasion is more of like a medical term. And I'm not saying it is, like that just says, stuff about my vocabulary. But we don't use abrasions. Like we use, oh, it was a cut, he got a cut, or he got a scar, or he got a scab, or things like that in everyday language. I don't use abrasion. And so Patsy in 1997, they asked her about this issue, as many of you probably know. They asked her about this issue of the golf club and Burke hitting JonBenet with a golf club. And they asked her about it, and this is Tom Trujillo kind of, mentioning that, and just kind of asking different things about JonBenet's illnesses and sicknesses, and so he asks, was she hospitalized at all? Patsy says no, just a quick trip to the office, and that was it. Talking about pneumonia, when she got diagnosed with pneumonia. And Patsy said, yeah, okay. What about any other injuries? Yeah. What about any injuries, any major injuries or major injuries to JonBenet? And Patsy responds, Burke hit her in the face with a golf club one time and the leg. And the leg? I didn't even see the leg. I didn't see the leg. See, 1997, when you're closest to, I didn't see the leg. I saw the face. I saw the face part, but when you say he hit her in the face and the leg, a golf swing, let me see. Boom, because I swing up. Because if I were to swing and hit her in the leg, then JonBenet had to be standing in front of me. Like she had to be standing right by my golf swing. Like she had to be standing like in front of me to in the line of path of my club swinging. And boom, I would have hit her in the leg, because that's the only time that my club is going to go down that low, because I'm starting with my club up here and then I'm swinging through, and when I'm down here, that's the only point when my club is low enough to hit the leg, and then boom, up like this. And so it makes sense if JonBenet and Patsy's going to provide clarity, but it makes sense. I'm confused. So Burke hit her in the club, hit her with the golf club one time, and the leg. Any stitches or anything like that? No, just kind of a skin abrasion. The word abrasion here, like a skin abrasion, the word abrasion here, I would have just said, and she had a little scar, a little teensy little scar there, but it just kind of squashed the skin up and something to stitch it. She had a black eye. Now, if he hit her with a golf club to the point that it was damaging, where she had to have a black eye, I get it. I get it. I have never been in the position in my life to where I've been hit hard enough to where I had a black eye. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. But anyways, I've not been hit hard enough to where I've had a black eye. Very few people have I seen in my life have a black eye. It doesn't matter race or skin color. I've not seen a lot of black eyes in my life. It's very rare for me. And so it's interesting. But Patsy downplays it by saying, "Oh, it was a teensy little scar." I don't know if it was a teensy little scar. Man, he hit her pretty hard. He hit her whether it was a teensy little scar or not. He hit her hard enough to give her a black eye. And Tom says 25th. During the day of the 25th, do you recall seeing any injuries on JonBenet? Any scratches, abrasions, cuts, bruises, anything like that? I don't remember. She was always getting bruised, kids. I don't remember anything. Nothing major. Nothing. So nothing major. Nothing that would cause you to use like aspirin or ice or anything like that. Patsy says no. So when during the day, JonBenet wasn't harmed. Now, of course, in the course of being a kid, you're going to have these abrasions, or you're going to have these, what I would call scars and scratches and bruises and things like that. But the fact that Patsy used the word abrasion in 1997 almost makes me think that somehow, some way, she got a hold to some sort of medical report and used some of the terminology and thought, because sometimes you see terminology somewhere and you're like, oh, that's a good word. I think I might start using that word. And sometimes it just slips through. I don't know. But you know what? I wanted to check and see if John Ramsey used the word abrasion in 1997, but he didn't. But okay, so we'll move on to 1998. 1998 with Patsy. We'll kind of stick with Patsy. And so different set of investigators coming in. Thomas Haney coming saying, okay, there was mention while we are talking about that. There was a mention of a situation where he apparently, talking about Burke sleeping at the Fernies and sleeping until John woke him up is what they're saying, sleeping through the night, blah, blah, blah. And so she says, okay, there's a situation where he apparently hit JonBenet with a golf club up at Charlevoix. And Patsy says, yes. Thomas says, can you tell us about that? Patsy says, he was just taking a little practice swing, or he was just taking a practice swing. He was just a little guy. He was 2 or 3 or 2.5, and he was in, and it was our first summer there. He was, how young were they? About what year would that have been? He asks. And Patsy says that was 1993. And I was like, 1993. In 93, if this is in summer, if this is in the summer of 93, Burke's birthday is in January, like the 29th or something like that. So his birthday was gone. So 1993 minus 1987, he'd have been 6 years old. So I don't understand. He'd have been 6 years old. So he's not little. I don't know where the 2 or 3 came from. Because if he were 2 or 3, then JonBenet wouldn't have been born, and there wouldn't have no. But what this was JonBenet at this time. JonBenet was like 3 going on 4, I believe, because JonBenet was 1990. JonBenet was 3 going on 4. So Burke is 6. JonBenet is 3. He's probably at this time. She's probably about 15, 20 pounds, maybe. And just kind of looking at just simple averages. At 3 years old, JonBenet may have been around like 32 pounds, something like that. She's 45 pounds when she died, so she may have been like 32 pounds when she was age 3, something like that. Thinking about her gaining about 46 pounds every year. And then Burke, 70 pounds at the time at 9 years old. He may have been somewhere between like 48 and 50 pounds when he was 6 years old. So you got a 50 pounder, you got a 50 pound kid about, and you got a 30 pound kid, and you know, and then kind of thinking about height. Burke was 4'9" at the time at 9 years old. JonBenet was about 3'9" at the time she died. She probably would have been maybe 3 inches, somewhere around there. Burke probably would have been 4'2" at the time, somewhere around there, maybe like 4 feet, 4'2". So kind of keeping that foot, that foot in between them in terms of their growth spurt. And so one does have to wonder if JonBenet, JonBenet is shorter than him. So Burke is not, when he swings the club, he's not swinging. You know, I kind of think that when you swing a club, of course you can swing, and depending on the side of the club, it can go behind, it can drop back here behind your neck. Or you can have any swing you want. You could swing weirdly and go like that, around your arm, kind of closer to your shoulder. But, one does wonder if there was some sort of playful intent to hit JonBenet. If he turned around and said, "Okay, JonBenet, back up. All right. If you don't back up, I'm gonna hit you." And maybe Patsy's sitting on the porch, not really paying attention. Just kind of doing some stuff around the house. One does wonder if he did it maybe a little bit on accident. Well, not on accident, but if he did it on purpose. You do kind of have to wonder that. I'm not saying he did, but I'm just saying one does have to wonder if he did it on purpose. Um, because when you swing a golf club, you can get hit, with a golf club, with a bat, when whatever. You're standing behind somebody, don't be standing behind me. Like, get from behind me. I understand that. Man, I used to be standing like right up behind my dad when he used to be fixing the car, and he would back up and step on my shoes, and I don't know why we would stand that close, and he was like, get from behind me. And it's just, I don't know why we would do that. Kids do stuff like that. So it's not that I don't believe that it happened, but something about the trajectory of a golf club makes me somewhat suspicious about her getting hit in the eye. And so the severity of it, that was in 1993, Patsy says, I believe. And he, he was out there with his little wiffle ball and golf balls, and she walked up behind, and he kind of clipped her right on the cheek, and she screamed bloody murder. And I jumped down off the porch and grabbed her and, slammed some ice on it. Now, the choice of the word slammed slammed some ice on it. Like it would seem that that's a very aggressive word for ice. And I'm not trying to be nitpicky, but that's a very aggressive word for ice. And I slammed some ice on it. I would have said put some ice on it. Um, to kind of, because it's like you're reflecting the gentleness of it. But like when you say slammed, it's like put it on there. It's not, and it's not like real slamming, but it's just kind of like, and I put it on there, and it's like, but wouldn't you have been gentle? Wouldn't your language reflect the gentleness with which, because she's just gotten hit in the eye with a golf club, and so you're coming down there to her aid, to her rescue. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. And I say that because, man, one time I was riding my bike, and I had ran into I turned around for a second, and then I turned back around, and I ran into the mailbox, and I went in a cartwheel, and I landed, and I slid on my elbow. And I got up, and I ran screaming in the house, and my dad was like looking at it, and he was like, ah, and just he pulled out the alcohol. I think that made it 10 times worse when I figured out, because I didn't know much about alcohol, but I knew it burned. I knew it burned. And so he was just kind of, oh, I gotta do this. I gotta do this, son. And he, kind of started putting it out. Ah! So, but anyways, uh, the gentleness with which he went about trying to apply the alcohol. I would think that, you know, with Patsy's language, she would use kind of a more gentle approach and say, well, and she was screaming bloody murder, and so I just kind of, patted the area with whatever, with some ice, and I just put some ice on it. Not slammed. Slam almost implies that it doesn't imply anything. Let me just, it doesn't imply anything. What it almost seems like to me is like I jumped off the porch and I went to slam Burke, or I wanted to slam Burke, but I slammed some ice on it. That's what I slammed. I slammed some ice. But, that indicates that you would have had to go back inside and get some ice and come back outside and then put some ice on it. She leaves those details out, and I'm interested. She just skips through those details instead of saying, well, he hit her in the face, and then I came outside with an ice pack. Because it's like, where were you when it was happening? All we know is that you jumped off of the porch. But it's like, in proximity to the situation, where were you? Where are those details? Because if you don't tell me those details, it almost seems as if you are trying to, again, downplay a situation. So as not to be perfect, you want to make it sound like your family isn't perfect, but you do, and so you kind of you got to give a little bit to get, to get a little bit. And so you give a little bit of a situation or scenario, but you help us understand that you're not neglectful in your parenting, and that your kids did not hate one another. And so they had nothing to hate one another about. And so you kind of put the blame on JonBenet for walking up behind Burke, when, you know, as a child, it may have been intentional. Kids do stuff like that sometimes. He may have done it intentionally. I'm not saying he did. I'm just saying he may have done it intentionally. And so she says, I jumped off the porch, instead of saying I was in the kitchen and I was washing dishes, and then I was looking through the window watching the kids, and then all of a sudden I heard JonBenet screaming bloody murder, and then I came outside and asked Burke what happened, and he said she walked up behind me and I hit her with the bat. And then, because it's like, how did you know to get ice? You see what I'm saying? Like, how did you know to get ice? That's what I'm wondering. You didn't jump off the porch and just immediately put ice on it. You had to go back inside and get ice, or you had to have already been inside and have gotten ice. And I wonder if you wanted to slam Burke for hurting JonBenet, as in, not as in I hate my child, but as in, what were you thinking? Why would you hit her with that? you know and because sometimes parents walk up to children, and the kid has done something, and sometimes parents can be aggressive. Nobody's perfect, but you walk up to the kid, and they have something, and you just yank it out of their hand. He's like, what are you doing? Come on, stop playing. Something like that. not to touch anything in this store. And I wonder if that kind of hit, to watch for your sister. I've taught you how to watch for your sister. I wonder if that played a role in it. And so when she uses the word slam, then I may be reading too much into it, but when she uses the word slammed ice, that may have indicated that she wanted to slam somebody, but I slammed ice on JonBenet instead. And I jumped down off the porch and I slammed ice on it. I thought he got her in the eye and went down there to the emergency room, and the doctor looked at it and said it was just fine. That the socket around your eye protects your eye there. So she's good. She had a good old black eye for a while. Um, she had a little, I don't remember which eye it was, a little abrasion. So she uses the word abrasion again. And I'm like, why are you using the word abrasion? I took her to a plastic surgeon just to see if there was anything to do to help her, to help there. And he said it will go away. So that was the end of that. So once again, she uses the word abrasion. She uses the word abrasion. And she's a little bit more definitive in the fact that it's the eye. But here, it's she had a black eye, of course. But here, let me see. Teensy little scar, hit her in the face with a golf club. Skin abrasion, squashed up skin. Any other injuries? Nothing major, nothing that you would have to use aspirin or ice or anything like that. No, that's weird though too, because she said she put ice on it, but nothing. Well, I guess that's on the 25th, so nothing that she had to put ice on. But anyways, Burke hit her in the face with a golf club. Or I'm thinking about something else, and it was just kind of a skin abrasion, a little scar there, but it's just kind of squashed up the skin, and she had a black eye. Okay, anyways, yeah, that's everything. Just taking a quick look. Okay, yeah. But anyways, so and then John mentions it in his 1988 interview. Well, he doesn't mention it, but he mentions the word abrasion. And so, um, have you seen it? Ramsey says no. John Ramsey says no, I have not. Talking about the autopsy report, I can't look at that. Okay, have you discussed in general what's in there in general? John Ramsey says very little. It's hard to discuss with her accidentally. Mike Kane says what would that be? And John Ramsey says um, that there was her skull fracture, that there were abrasions in her private area. Two of her organs were swollen, which indicated a slow death. Of course, right, as we know, she died slowly and whatnot. And so he uses the word that there were abrasions in the area. John, to my knowledge so far, and I have to go look this up some more, but John, to my knowledge so far, is the only one discussing abrasions to the private area. And it's like, why would you bring that up? Why? When we're talking about the autopsy report, you could talk about anything you want to talk about. And we know that there's a fracture to the skull. But when we ask you top of mind, and we're thinking about unaided awareness, and when I say unaided awareness, that means you think of it without any help. Like when we talk about aided awareness, especially in consumer behavior, we're talking about something that helps you think about something that helps you think about a product or what have you. Like if I play like a Coca-Cola jingle, or like a jingle that you associate with Coca-Cola, and then you think about Coca-Cola, okay, that's aided awareness. But if you can just think of, like, if you just look at red and you associate red with Coca-Cola, that's unaided. Like, or a better example is if we're asking about, weight loss programs, and I say, okay, any weight loss programs that you're familiar with, and you go, oh, Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers, and you just kind of mention those things. That's unaided awareness. Nobody had to ask you specifically and probe you specifically about any weight loss programs or anything. But if I say, what about, have you ever heard of those little food bowls or anything, or those little drinks, and like the chocolate drinks in the bottles, and you say, oh yeah, and sure, and then okay, So I had to kind of, or how about anything from Johnson and Johnson? And you say, oh well, from Johnson and Johnson, any lotions that you've heard from Johnson and Johnson? Oh yeah, I think they have baby lotion. I've had to sort of aid you in thinking about those things, and so that tells us about things that are top of mind. It's useful in telling us, especially when we're analyzing consumers, what's top of mind for that consumer. What's the most important thing? What comes to mind without any help? I don't have to help you with anything. You just think about that stuff. That's something that stays. And so from there, why is that important? That's important because from there, that helps us to understand how we package information to you and lets us know that where we sit in your mind. And there's a different kind of marketing plan and a marketing scheme behind that. And so when we talk about unaided and unaided awareness in this case, and I talk to you about the autopsy report, anything in the autopsy report that you can think of, it's kind of aided in that we're kind of guiding in terms of the autopsy report, but I'm not telling you any specific thing to talk about. I'm just saying, have you had an opportunity to read the autopsy report? Now, what you can do, unaided, I didn't ask you, just in general, I've asked you just in general, have you guys discussed it? I didn't ask anything. You could have talked to me about um, the choking hazard. You could have talked to me about that. Man, just the way she died, it was crazy. Just the fact that, she had this choking hazard or whatever, that was crazy to me. But the first thing that you mentioned when they asked you about it, and they said just in general, you went to abrasions, you went to the skull fracture, they hit on the head, and then you went to the fact that she died a slow death, and then you went to, and that was third, but the second thing was the abrasions in the private area. What about the abrasions in the private area? Like, what does that mean? Just like, what's the narrative there? What's the story behind that? What's the backup behind that? Why does your mind, because as a father, of course, you're thinking about maybe, man, this is what my kid went through. And between the skull fracture and the slow death, he mentions assault. So she got hit over the head. There's an assault, and then a slow death. And I'm not saying that JonBenet died in that order. I'm just saying that was second in mind. And that's very interesting is all I'm saying. But my entire point of reading this is just the communication of the abrasion, and also the tidbit that we just picked up in the fact that JonBenet was hit in the head, or that she was hit in the eye and the leg. I would tend to think that being hit in the leg is more intentional. And so that would make sense as to Patsy flying, describing it in that language. If I hear JonBenet, if she gets hit in the eye and I hear her scream bloody murder, I look up immediately. And I'm looking out the window. If I'm inside and I look out the window, and because my daughter is screaming, and I'm alarmed. I'm alert now. And I'm like, what the heck? And I'm looking up, and if I look up and I see you, and I'm not saying this happened, I'm just, hypothesizing a little bit or whatever. If I look up and I see you, you've hit her. I haven't, I didn't see the eye hit or whatever, but I do see you swinging down like you've hit boom. And I do see you swinging around and boom on the leg, going up and then coming lower. So I saw the boom on the leg. And so now that would tend to make me run outside very quickly and you know, a, and you think there wasn't a conversation about what the heck are you doing? It was so important that she took this little girl, because to me, it was like, oh my goodness, I need to put ice on it. And that's what I would have done. That'd have been it. At 4 years old, I would have just put ice on it. Patsy took this girl to the plastic surgeon. Did he hit her that hard? Because say, for example, if think about it in your own case, if one of your kids, maybe swung on another one, and You know what? I'll give you a better example. I'll use myself again. When I was younger, I was trying to jump rope with a shirt. And when I jump roped with the shirt, uh, I, it was going down and it caught my legs. And then it caught, it caught my legs and I went down and I was exposed and I hit my mouth right on the floor. Boom, you know, and I got up and my mouth was throbbing. And I went to my mom. I was like, "Oh my goodness, I just hit my mouth." And she was like, "What happened?" I said, "I hit my mouth on the floor. I hit my mouth on the floor." And I said, "I hit my mouth on the floor." And she's like, "Oh my goodness, let's go put some ice on it." And that was it. We didn't go to the plastic surgeon. We didn't go to the dentist. If it would have knocked out a tooth, we would have been at the dentist the next day. And so it makes you wonder, how hard did Burke hit JonBenet for Patsy to use language of "I flew off the porch and I slammed"? That's language almost as intense, like I had to put a stop to something before it got out of hand. Possibly like JonBenet was being beat up, you know, and it was being, and I'm not saying that Burke was beating anybody up. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the language seems to indicate that there was a need to go a little bit faster and move with urgency, because typically I understand that the parent is going to move with urgency, but there's two kinds of urgencies: one that's going to move to put a stop to it before anything further happens, or one urgency that says, I got to get out there with my baby. There is no more threat, but I have to resolve. So there's two type of urgencies: one to resolve and one to stamp out a threat. And I almost feel like with the language that Patsy used is to get rid of that threat of any further damage happening. Because when you say he hit her in the eye and on the leg, that's a up and down. That's the top. That's from the top to the bottom. The head, I get that, but the leg, that seems intentional. And that seems like a child being a child. That seems like a child who, you know, he may have saw JonBenet coming, didn't really understand the implications or the weight or the didn't understand the pain that that wiffle ball could or that wiffle golf club or whatever, the plastic golf club um could cause, and he hit her with it. Um, just being funny, just like, all right, you don't stand behind me, get away. I'm telling you, JonBenet, get away, get away, get away. And she was probably she's 3, so she doesn't understand, and so she's being an annoying 3-year-old, coming over, trying to touch and uh, uh, kind of sticking her hand over there and stuff like that. And he's like, JonBenet, get away from me, because that communicates something to me. He's 6. At 6 years old, he's at a significantly um, more developed position. He understands well at this point. We talked about JonBenet and her development, but he understands. He's well developed in his mind and thought process. And Patsy can now speak to him and talk to him and tell him the do's and the don'ts, right? Um, and things of that nature. Protect your sister, love your sister. You saw Patsy in some of the pictures putting Burke and putting Burke and JonBenet together in a loving way. And so she's trying to sort of teach him how to exemplify that kind of love to his sister and protect his sister. But instead of doing that, Burke is swinging a golf club and hitting her in the face, and not only in the face, but in the leg. And that may speak to the fact that Burke was a little bit of a jokester, and not a jokester in that way, but um, like a jokester. He just didn't think it was that big of a deal. He just didn't think it was that serious. But he hit her so hard that her eye got black, and she had to go to the plastic surgeon because she was in that much of need. And so looking at some of this interview, uh the following key injuries form the foundation for this analysis. Each is briefly described in lay terms to prepare a deeper exploration. So, key parts discussed: the rope around the neck, the groove, the petechiae, the sustained compression, craniocerebral trauma, comminuted fracture, brain contusions, right cheek abrasion. We talked about this. Right shoulder contusion and abrasion. Again, there's that word abrasion. Lower left back and leg abrasions. There's it again, indicative of dragging. Private area trauma and vascular congestion. Wrist ligature assessed as possible post-mortem staging. So going into this second part, trying to break it down. So when we think about the rope around the neck area, we're talking about a deep groove was left on JonBenet's neck by something tied tightly around it, is kind of what we're introducing here. Maybe if you can think about like a belt or a rope tight enough to cut the skin, which is now, if it's that tight, it's going to restrict airflow. And so the interpretation might be that the pressure had to be maintained for at least 30 seconds. If we're talking about this being a cause of death, then that pressure had to be maintained for at least 30 seconds, because you're thinking about somebody who's not in a position to know that an attack is coming. And so this is put around her and it's now forced and used as an attack. Okay. And so it has to be there at least for 30 seconds and likely longer. And this brings about the petechiae, which is the bursting blood vessels on her face and eyes, confirm that this is not a momentary action, right? So we kind of ask, several questions. How long does it take for petechiae to form? And so I think it takes about 10 to 30 seconds of sustained pressure for petechiae to start kind of setting in. Okay, so we ask, could this have been sustained or caused by just somebody doing like a quick yank? Well, no, because when we're talking about this choking hazard, if we're calling it that, the medical evidence, when we're talking about death by this, you're going to have a prolonged force. So then we ask, was JonBenet conscious during this point in time? And so that's possible that at the start, she was conscious. So if she was moving or trying to resist, DNA might be under her fingernails, and we'll probably learn that later on in the analysis of the autopsy report. But DNA might be under her fingernails. But like I said, we're just getting an overview. DNA might be under her fingernails. So we then ask, why would someone do this after a head injury? If we're thinking about the head injury coming first, why would somebody implement a choking hazard after the head injury? And so we kind of reason that the rope may have been used during a moment of continued rage or panic, not necessarily as calm and as a calm and calculated act. This may have been something where the garrote or the toggle rope was something that was there for opportunity. It may have already been made. Now I want to show some pictures here. Now, when we talk about this conjunctival petechiae, stuff like this, like some of these spots, inside, I'm not a medical professional, but I was just trying to look this stuff up. Some of these like little spots in here that I understand, and we're talking about blood vessels bursting, the pressure being so tight that blood vessels start to burst. Okay. So you start to kind of get these little spots inside of the eye, I believe, things of that nature. Just kind of gives you, some an idea. And so you kind of see another one here that I try to get pulled down, some spots around the eye here. I don't know if you can see them in this. I don't think I see any spots here, but just some spots in the eye right here. Okay. Something like that. And so again, as JonBenet is alive and she's experiencing this, she's experiencing the pressure, the because she's not ready for this, then she's not ready for this. So then I'm kind of running out of time. She's not ready for this, so she might she might not have, let me describe it like this. When you're trying to take a breath and you go underwater, you take a breath before you go underwater, and you're like, and you have 30 seconds. But if you're wrestling and roughhousing and stuff like that, anything like that, moving around, you haven't had a chance to take in that to inhale, right? And so you're operating on it's a problem because if somebody sort of implements a choking hazard, then you're already at your wits end. You don't If I stop right now and my lungs, if I inhale, I could probably hold for 30 seconds. And then after that 30 seconds, I'm cooked. You know what I mean? I could probably hold for 30 seconds. And after that 30 seconds, I'm cooked. But that's my lung capacity. JonBenet would have a shorter lung capacity, right? She might have 10 or 15 seconds. And then after that, she's cooked. All of her oxygen is gone. She has no more oxygen. It's gone. She exhales. She's cooked. And so as if she were to, in a perfect world, if she were to have been able to inhale, that would have added 15 seconds to her life. But, and maybe that would have saved her life. And maybe that would have, whatever happened, maybe that would have given her the opportunity. That would have saved her life, maybe. I don't know. But maybe. Maybe she would have been in vegetable state. But anyways, I bring that up to say, because I want to drive the point home and the weight of this, right? I want to drive the point home and the weight of this. JonBenet she's gasping for air. She can't get it because the noose is tightening. And she's, as this is happening, these spots are starting to form on her face. If we're talking about an individual that's assaulting, and this is for pleasure, I am not sure that they would take an individual to the brink of this, where I can understand the face turning blue, but the face is turning blue. I don't think they would tie it so tight because it's just for pleasure. So I'm not going to be tying it so tight that it starts to cause this kind of harm, because the individual that is sick like this is there to derive pleasure, but not to cause an overwhelming amount of harm. Mistakes can happen. They have happened, but this kind of bursting of the blood vessels, and I got a couple more. I got a lot of stuff. And I like I said, I looked at this stuff, when did I look at this stuff? This is in my autopsy folder. I looked at this stuff, man, around Christmas of last year, like 12/29, as you can see. 12/29 of 2024. I looked at some of this stuff at 12/29, 2024. It was overwhelming at the time. It was a lot, but I was just downloading pictures and stuff like that. But I didn't know how I was going to present it. And so I feel okay. So a lot of this stuff is not really applicable. But I want to show you this. I went on TikTok and I found this girl. She was talking about, you always think the post headstand bench petechiae won't last longer than a few days. And so she's talking about like these little breakout points around her face. And she's talking about post headstand bench. And so she has another one, and she looks on the other side where she's kind of talking about this. And I don't know her. I just, petechiae inversion yoga. So she's talking about yoga. She's doing yoga. And apparently in yoga, when you do your headstands, all that blood rushes to your head. And there may be some sort of, and I don't do yoga, so I don't know anything about yoga. But there may be some sort of necessity for petechiae and stuff like that. So this is what happens, like these little dots that start forming on JonBenet's face as she's struggling and she can't breathe. But it's not, I want to be clear. It's not just that she can't breathe. Not being able to breathe is a totally different thing to my understanding. Not only can she not breathe, but we're talking about the tightness of the garrote. We're talking about the tightness. Um, you know what? I think I got an example, but I don't want to. Let's take this chapstick, right? And you know, if if I'm using this chapstick, right? And let's say I'm putting a lot of pressure on this chapstick. Let's just imagine that I'm putting a lot of pressure on this chapstick, and the chapstick, if that's the case, it forces up, right? It starts forcing upwards, and it's going to cause pressure upwards to build upwards. Thank you, chapstick. It's going to cause pressure upwards. And so that's what we're talking about. Somebody was squeezing and pulling. So now we're not, somebody was squeezing and pulling so tight that it's forcing pressure upwards. So now we're no longer talking about somebody trying to, because when you do it in the crime, you're putting gentle pressure. You're applying, when you do it for pleasure, it's my understanding that you're doing gentle pressure. You're not trying to harm a person in that way. And I understand, sometimes your hand can get a little heavy, but this is indicative of somebody actually pulling and applying more pressure. So I dare I say somebody pulling and twisting around and holding over their arm like this. Maybe so. That would not be um that would not be derived from pleasure. That would be rage. That's what we're talking about. That would be rage. So I just wanted to show you a couple examples of petechiae and stuff like that, just to kind of get an idea of what that might look like and what JonBenet was going through. Okay, so this is not calm and calculated, in my opinion. This is rage. Then you got craniocerebral trauma. And so we're talking about a blow to the right side that shatters the skull and bruises the brain. Now, I got some more pictures on that, I believe. So let me close this down. I don't need to close it down, but anyways. Yeah, I just want to show this part. So, and especially talking about cerebral contusions. Um, um, Kind of highlighting, just hits in it. I was watching a YouTube video on it, and so kind of like some hits to the head right here. Not necessarily saying that that's where it is, but kind of thinking about. And it was "What is Cerebral Contusion" by Robert Jarchi, and I think he's a lawyer. Like, I watched this months ago, but I think he was a lawyer explaining this. Um, it typically occurs when the brain strikes the skull during something traumatic. And so he's kind of talking about that, and I want to take a picture of it. I wanted to take a picture of it, but now we have sort of like, I wanted to understand what it meant by comminuted. And so he kind of a hit to the skull here, and so you have types of skull fractures. And I know this is kind of blurry. Let me try to make it a little bit bigger for you to see. It's not going to stop it from being blurry. But anyways, you have the comminuted right here, and then you have the linear right here. So it's like a crack right along. You have a basilar, I think. I'm just looking at the how fuzzy it is, and then you have the depressed right here. But I think the two things that we saw in the report when it came to craniocerebral, we saw linear comminuted fracture on the right side of the skull, linear pattern of contusions of the right cerebral hemisphere. We saw subarachnoid and subdural hemorrhages. We saw small contusions to the tips of the temporal lobes. And so, like I said, we're talking about a comminuted injury here, and we're talking about a linear injury here. And so the crack is going this direction. Comminuted fracture, skull fracture. Just kind of looking up some stuff. Comminuted fractures are those in which the bone shatters, excuse me, into three or more places. Comminuted fractures can be categorized as depressed fractures if the bone pieces are driven inside the skull. Okay. And so you kind of see sort of this comminuted and somewhat linear, but it's broken up into three or more. It shatters in three or more places, and so but it's linear. So when we think about something that may be comminuted, it might be cracked in two or three places, but down a linear path, maybe that looks something like this. And I'm just, I don't know. I'm just talking. So maybe something that looks like this. Now I think it was a little bit higher up on the head, but just something that, there's a crack, you know, um, in two or three places as they're showing it, but it's a fracture and it's a little bit linear. That's what I understand it maybe to mean. Okay. But this is what's going on. This is what JonBenet, after she takes a hit, this is what JonBenet is experiencing. And we have the petechiae. I think that's all. I think that's everything. All about the comminuted. We had a little something here. 45-year-old man. This is a small contusion. Tips of the temporal lobes. Location example. Before we get there, we got some contusions to the tips of the temporal lobes. This is kind of what it might look like. Just look, I'm not an expert. I'm just, we're trying to talk about it. So a 45-year-old man was brought to the hospital confused and with a receptive aphasia following a motor vehicle accident. Copyright '06, David C. Preston, revised 11/15. I think this came from Carnegie Mellon. Temporal lobe contusion, axial CT scans without contrast. Note that the area of traumatic contusion, which consists of hemorrhage and surrounding edema, in the left anterior temporal lobe along the frontal poles, the temporal lobe tip is a common location of cerebral contusions following head injury where the brain continues to move forward, striking the inner skull after the head has stopped moving. And so this is important because if JonBenet got this, then we're talking about there was a strike to the inner skull, and after the head stopped moving, then there was more jarring that it continued. So somebody hit JonBenet because we're not talking about. Listen to what I'm saying, man. We're not talking about. Play with your mom if you want to. Play with your mama. Because we're not talking about somebody that was assaulting and trying to just, apply pressure and take off pressure, apply it and take it off, apply it and take it off, basically causing her to go in and out. We're not talking about that. We're talking about somebody who smacked her so hard that it caused the crack. It caused the crack to look like this, something like this. It caused that kind of crack, broke it up in a couple pieces so that we can get that comminuted fracture and that linear fracture. It broke it up something like this, and when her head stopped moving, it was still moving in her head. Bruh. And let me, yeah. As they said, let me put in striking the inner skull after the head has stopped and the brain continues to move forward after the head has stopped moving. Okay. And I was talking about, okay, yeah, because I have a few of these and I'm not going to get to everything today, but talking about brain hemorrhaging and epidural, subdural, subarachnoid, intercerebral, concisely described is what I was looking up. Some contusions to the shoulders and things of that nature. Okay. Asphyxia associated with Okay. Small contusion tips of the temporal lobe causes. And this is what I was looking at. A contusion-like damage to both temporal lobes simultaneously could occur from a forceful blow to the side of the head, causing the brain to rapidly accelerate and impact the bony ridges inside the skull on both sides, particularly in a situation where the impact is delivered from a slightly angled direction towards the temples, effectively pinching the temporal lobes between the skull's bony structure and the impacting force. So it's delivered at an angle. Okay, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Is delivered at an angle. I think you can see that now. Um, Key points to consider: the impact location. The blow needs to be directed towards the side of the head around the temporal regions where the bony ridges are most prominent. Force and direction. A significant force is required to cause such damage, and the impact should be angled slightly inwards to maximize contact with both temporal lobes. Now, while a direct blow, coup and contre coup. Injury mechanisms. While a direct blow to one side can cause damage on the opposite side, contra coup injury, due to the brain's movement within the skull, a well-placed impact on the side of the head could potentially cause simultaneous damage to both temporal lobes due to their proximity to the bony edges. Again, when we talk about this blunt force, we're talking about an intentional impact. Somebody took a swing at her, is what we're talking about. Examples of situations where this could occur: direct hit to the side of the head with a blunt force object. A strong blow to the temporal region with a baseball bat or similar objects could potentially cause bilateral temporal lobe contusions. Fall with the head impact against a hard surface. If someone falls and hits the side of their head directly on a hard surface, the impact could cause damage to both the temporal lobes. This is what happened to JonBenet. One of these two things right here. This is what happened to JonBenet. Small contusion tips on the tips of the temporal lobes refers to small areas of brain bruising located at the very front part of the temporal lobes, which are particularly vulnerable to the injury due to the proximity of the skull's bony ridges, often occurring as a result of head trauma where the brain strikes against the skull during impact. This is a common site for cerebral contusions, meaning a brain bruise, and can potentially cause neurological issues depending on the severity of the damage. And I think that's everything. And as we saw that, small contusions, tips of the temporal lobe locations. Once again, locations, contusions to the tips of the temporal lobe refers to bruising or the damage to the very front part, which are located on the sides of the brain behind the temples, particularly vulnerable to the injury due to the proximity, so on and so forth. We just read that. Subarachnoid hemorrhaging, and I'm going to close it out after this. Subarachnoid hemorrhaging. We have the skull right here, and then we have the dura mater right here. Blood fills the space between the arachnoid matter and the pia mater right here. We have the spontaneous rupture or a head injury, and the thunderclap headache feels like a kick to the head, and we have the arachnoid matter here. So I'm glad they did this, because it's describing what JonBenet felt. Not only is there pressure upwards, but at some point in time, something hit her so hard, it was like a kick to the head. Boom. And then her boom, and then her head stopped, and then the brain kept moving to cause those contusions. Somebody hit her hard. And they hit her with such force, with such intentional force. This is not an assault where somebody is applying and taking off pressure. This is an assault to where somebody is intentionally, that's what that is. Whether it's rage or whether it's panic, that's the criminal that we're looking for. That's the person we're looking for. A kick to the head. Subdural hemorrhaging. You have the hairline fracture and the subdural hematoma. Kind of a little bit more that I was kind of looking at and stuff like that. I'm not going to go too much more into that. Subdural hemorrhaging, as we talked about before, blood comes from severed bridging veins, slower onset of symptoms, shaken, kind of like shaken baby syndrome, whiplash. Blood fills the space between whiplash right here. I know it's a little blurry, but I think you can see it. The brain compressed to the skull, boom, right here, as we showed with the earlier picture. Force of collision, boom. Force from the impact causes the brain to move and twist in the skull, kind of exemplified right here. The brain rebound on the opposite side of the skull, boom, boom. So kind of like a rebound, I guess is what it's called. So it's like a JonBenet's head went like that. Do you understand me? JonBenet's head went like that. That is crazy. That is absolutely crazy. Yeah, that's the last picture I have on that. And so, blow to the right side of her head shattered her skull and bruised her brain, like being hit with a heavy flashlight. The impact was severe enough to cause death, though not immediately. So she didn't die immediately from this. Interpretation, the location and the linear pattern of the brain bruises suggest her head either struck a flat surface or was hit by a straight, narrow object. Um, and so some of the questions that we asked here, that like we could ask, could she have been upright when she was struck? Likely, given the fall trajectory. Okay. Was the blow by accident? Unlikely, it shows targeted force. What kind of emotional response leads to this? Most likely a sudden surge of rage in response to maybe humiliation or rejection. And we talked a little bit before about JonBenet being feisty, and that's why I mentioned that. When John said, I can imagine if JonBenet didn't know somebody, she goes kicking and screaming. But if she knows someone, she's not going to kick and scream and whatnot. If they wake her up, she's not going to kick and scream. Maybe if she knows someone, that's not totally true, because Nidra came back and Steve Thomas talked to Nidra, and Nidra came back and said, "Oh yeah, when I wake JonBenet up, to when I wake her up to take her to the restroom, because I'm not dealing with that whole using the restroom on my. I'm not going to deal with this whole let her use the restroom on your sheets and then wake her up and wake her up in the morning and deal with that." Nidra was like, my daughter can do that, but I'm not doing that. Grandma's not doing that. I'm waking her up and saying, come on, baby. Let's go to the restroom. And JonBenet, when she gets, when Nidra wakes her up, she gets to kicking and screaming and giving the elbows and all such as that. Okay. So even when it's somebody that JonBenet knows, she could do that too. So it's a JonBenet's a little bit feisty in certain situations. Maybe a little feisty when she's kind of tired and just now waking up. Maybe a little bit feisty if she wants something. Maybe a little bit whiny when she wakes up and she wants something. And maybe she sees that somebody has something and she goes over there and says, give me some now, blah, blah, blah. And that causes an issue because she's like, mm, I want some, and she's just a little feisty in the mornings when she wakes up and stuff like that. Every other time she's good, but sometimes you're a little cranky in the morning. You need your coffee. And so that could be an issue. Somebody annoying you, somebody frustrating you. It's like, whatever I have in my space is mine. Get away from me, JonBenet. And JonBenet is, oh, I want some, mom. I can't have some of this, mom. Somebody is stopping me from getting something. You see what I'm saying? So it's just like that could be a scenario that happens. I'm just saying, because we're talking about JonBenet could have been that feisty when she wakes up, and so she may not have been thinking clearly enough to be respectful of others. And so a feisty response of some sort, a feisty response, we're going to talk about a little bit more where the feisty response may have come in on the next video. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, where that feisty response may have come in on the next video. But a feisty response may have led to some sort of humiliation or rejection in a sorts, right? Because again, whoever came into the house, had to deal with a JonBenet that would have been kicking and screaming. And even if they covered her mouth, which you can't do it the entire time, we're dealing with a JonBenet that would have scratched, would have clawed. This JonBenet would have clawed something. She would have got something. She would have scratched something. If you're in her proximity, she probably would have got you. Little feisty. It's painting the picture that JonBenet was a little feisty. She was a fighter, a little bit of a tomboy, in that I could throw hands with the best of them. Don't play with me. I might be pageant princess, but hey, don't play with me. You know, I could put something on you. You know, and that's what I'm thinking is the case, possibly. So, anyways, let me know what you think in the comments. Like, share, subscribe. I appreciate you. Thank you for the support. Everybody, thank you for liking and sharing, subscribing. Thank you for commenting, and just putting up with me in general. Thank you for the love. Thank you for the encouragement. But anyways, let me know what you think in the comments. Like I said, like, share, subscribe. And until next time, take it easy.